This is the state of the nation. Ibifa Mwanga. We are deliberate, we are reasonable, we are uncensored. The state of the nation with Henry Salu. This is the state of the nation. Ibifa Mwanga. We are deliberate, we are reasonable, we are uncensored. The state of the nation with Henry Salu. All right. I hope you hear me. My name is Henry Salu. Welcome to the African Alumni Association, and this is the state of the nation. Before we start, we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto African Alumni Association operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many indigenous people from across the Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. I think that is important for those of you who know why I do recite the land acknowledgement. Great. For those who do not know, we do recognize that we work on indigenous land here in Canada. I hope that will be the same in future in Uganda and all African countries. Again, welcome to the State of the Nation. We do have an interesting conversation today, and for those of you who have had an opportunity to see who are the people in studio with me today, you will realize that I do have the usual participants. Dr. Stella Nyanzi is one of our regulars here. Marion Chilabo, she's also becoming another regular here. And today we have a new colleague, Mr. Henry Lubulwa, joining us here today. Welcome all of you. To some who have had an opportunity to see the conversation today, it is, of course, something that is going to be, we are trying to interrogate the state of mind of an elite in Uganda. What are some of the conversations they are engaging in right now? If they are not, why aren't they engaging? Should they be engaging? We think they should. But of course, as you have been seeing a lot of things happening, it seems that some people are not really engaged in politics, either because they think engaging is dangerous, or for some reason won't make any change. Therefore, they choose not to participate at all because they think silence might be better for them to thrive within that state, which is almost a state of nature, because apparently Uganda is being governed by a leviathan or a dictator, a ruthless dictator who works with his government and his colleagues to terrorize Ugandans who speak truth to power, Ugandans who try to make to ask for accountability within that country. It is very unfortunate that we are at this state of discussion, and we hope that that will end soon. Hopefully, by having these discussions, we are adding some value to this question or to this conversation. So there's a lot to talk about. Before I proceed, I am going to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves, starting with the ladies in the house. Today I'll start with, last time I started with Stella. This time I'm going to start with Marion. Marion, are you ready? Are you having trouble with logging in?
Hi Henry. I'm having trouble with my me.
Okay. So do you want to introduce yourself, or do you want Dr. Stella to go first?
And it's okay, I can introduce myself, but I'll just have to keep my video off.
Okay, that's fine.
Can you hear me?
We don't hear you.
You don't hear. Can you hear now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I think we can hear you now.
Yes, so my name is Marion. Happy to be here. Currently at the CEO of an organization called Generation Initiative, and at encouraging women's participation.
Your voice is breaking.
Position. My voice is breaking. And
yeah.
Is it clear?
So some words are clear, others are not necessarily clear. Some words are clear, others are not.
But now,
I'm going to advise that you restart your computer and then come back. Does that make sense?
Okay. Let me restart.
All right, Dr. Stella. Welcome again to the State of the Nation. Are you excited to be here today?
Right. Thank you very much, Henry. Sally, it's a pleasure for me to return today. Uganda is still mourning for fallen elephant speaker Jacob Olanya, and I continue to commiserate with the family and friends of Yakobo Olanya, Chitalonyo Chitalo. As an academic who has paid the price for my freedom of expression in Uganda, as an academic, as a member of the elite core, right in the middle of Uganda's elite, particularly through education, I want to say that not all of us academics are not interested in the politics of the day. And so I want to introduce myself in the capacity of a Ugandan who wonders how a human being can claim to be living a full life when that human being silences themselves. Part of human dignity is the ability to express. It is like farting. Farting is a human biological process. Right. Shitting, vomiting. If one doesn't let this out, the steam within becomes poisonous and toxic. And academics have got a lot to offer in terms of contributing through speech and action. And so I welcome the conversation for today, because as an academic, I would run mad if I censored myself, if I silenced myself, if I gagged myself. And so I hope that in the conversation we have this evening, that my free expression calling out Ugandan intelligentsia who are silent, that this call will go out through this panel. Thank you very much for organizing and bringing two other brilliant co-panelists.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Henry Lubulwa, introduce yourself. Welcome to the State of the Nation. This is your first time coming, so people are going to want to know, who is this new guy entering the fraternity of the State of the
Nation? Thank you. Thank you so much, Henry Sally, and exceedingly grateful to be on a panel that holds a lady of valor, Stella Nyanzi, and yourself and Mariam Chilabo, who have all been in the spotlight, who have always been hoping out to talk about the things that this country has to work upon, but no one is listening and nothing is being done to help society improve, and even the people, especially the elite, who are looking at how do I survive today, or how do I survive in this current regime, do not talk about. I'm profoundly honored, just like Shaka Sadi says, and I'm exceedingly humbled.
Welcome aboard. Welcome aboard, brother. All right,
Yes,
we're
yes.
waiting. We are, of course, you're waiting for another panelist, Marion, who will be joining us shortly. Oh yeah, so it seems she's here. Can you speak, Marion? Are you able to hear us now? Marion, are you there? Unmute yourself. Yeah, there you go.
Yes, I can hear me now. Okay, should I just again?
Yeah. So I don't know what happened to your audio. Your audio is not necessarily perfect today. I don't know what's going on. Yeah, can you speak?
So can
Okay, so you're speaking.
can you hear me?
Yeah, but we are struggling to hear you. There's an echo. For some reason, you have an echo. I'm sorry?
Let me try and see another device. Like there's an echo.
Yeah, there is an echo coming out of your device.
I would like to suggest that if Marion has got two gadgets, like a phone and a laptop, that she mutes one of them, the ones she's not using, because usually the feedback comes from having a second gadget that is also on the Facebook page or on StreamYard.
Did you hear that, Mario?
I think I am using one gadget.
You're using one gadget. Okay. Can you speak? Introduce yourself. Let me see. Hopefully, it's gonna come out well now. Do you hear me? All right. All right. All right. Okay, so why don't we start? It's just the two of us, Dr. Stella. I think we can pull this off, certainly in a different dynamic, but there are so many different slogans. Today, I started the conversation by saying, by suggesting that one of the most common right now, one of the most common words in Uganda today is the notion that when you talk about certain things, especially when you start to question certain things, from our perspective, if it's about accountability, you'll find that people who are, we hope, are supposed to take care of stuff, they will even tell you that Uganda OLEMWA. That's a new slogan that has come up lately. People always say Uganda OLEMWA. But that's not the only one. There are other slogans that have come along the way in the last couple of years. These slogans are either depicting hope or hopelessness within people. not necessarily among the elites, but from people who you might think are expecting more from the elites. So, for example, there is a slogan that says, I have a couple of slogans that I've written down here. So I'm trying to pick out a few that I think might be helpful to this conversation. Kola sente zo osirike. Make your money and keep quiet. Don't bother about the politics of Uganda. It's not your jurisdiction. You shouldn't be questioning nothing regarding politics. These people usually say this in anticipation that when you make money and keep quiet, you are going to be fine. The rest of the political affairs won't affect you as much, and therefore you are better off making money and keeping quiet. Stop questioning how the status quo operates because your questioning will potentially get you in trouble. That is one of the slogans that I'm not sure whether that is optimistic or hopelessness that brings about that notion of not questioning. There's another one that says, Mulawe Duka. Mulawe Duka. So I'm not sure if that's political, actually. Mulawe Duka. But it's something that they use a lot as well. Buliomagu Mune. Chili Uganda Mama Nyabo. Tochisusa. My Lord, I wonder. And they bring out all these different slogans when you question, when you ask them tough questions, they tend to respond in such a way that potentially that's how they think that's how they think they can answer your questions, or they can run away from being accountable. They always bring something. Like recently, when you ask about why are prices very high, what are politicians doing to ensure that these prices are not so high, they will tell you that Uganda OLEMWA, Uganda OLEMWA. So Spire recently wrote a paper, one article, that was challenging this notion of elites being quiet within Uganda or refusing to participate in politics because they think participation in politics will potentially get them in trouble. But we also have evidence from government, for example. We have evidence of people who have been serving this system being is a word that I'm trying to look for, but that I can't find. But the examples I want to refer to are, for example, General Katumba Wamala has been serving this government for more than 3 decades. He recently survived an assassination in which his daughter was killed under the government that he serves. Of course, the report hasn't come out yet, but many people say that the government might have known what transpired. We don't know. We are still waiting for that report. It hasn't come out yet. When you ask for the report, you are likely going to get a similar slogan: Uganda OLEMWA, oba kola sente osirike. The Right Honorable Dr. Jacob Olanya, the former Speaker of the 11th Parliament, when he passed on, or before he passed on, he spoke to his dad, according to the reflections from his dad and revelations. And he told him, hey, Dad, I was likely poisoned and I may not live much longer. That's according to his dad, to his dad's remarks. This is a guy who has been serving the establishment, and to think that the establishment potentially knows or has an idea on how he died is something that we should all think about broadly and wonder if serving the government is indeed profitable or safe or whatever. So the question is, why are politicians, not really politicians, elites in Uganda, why are they quiet? Why do elites choose quiet over talking? And should we continue with this trend? I know, Stella, you have been talking a lot, and because you have chosen to speak out, many people try to depict you as someone who is somewhat of a nuisance within the Ugandan within the Ugandan fraternity, political fraternity, even though you are an elite yourself. So I guess what keeps you excited or encouraged to talk about political issues in Uganda when it will be much more easier for you to keep quiet and live supposedly good life in Uganda without questioning nothing? Why do you choose to speak up and challenge status quo?
Right. So, Henry, you make a number of good points. I think in addition to OLEMWA and Chiri Uganda Mama Nyabo and oyo mulabe Duka, I think the state of silencing in Uganda is also reflected in a few others you've forgotten. Chirabe osirike. Sirika. Equivalent to observe this and shut up. See this and keep quiet. Hear them and keep quiet. So the self-silencing is really huge. I communicate a lot with people on social media and also by phone. And what's interesting is that this notion of osirike is echoed by everyday people, common Ugandans, but also leaders in the opposition, leaders, cultural leaders, because I have access to both political leaders and cultural leaders in Uganda, in Kampala specifically. And the idea of Ugandans saying Baganda, using our language to say Chirabo Sirike. And I think for me, the other one is, buli omu agumya munne. Okugumya is what we do to console and comfort and strengthen each other when we've lost somebody. Like, hey, mugumye takaaba nnyo. Comfort this person, console them so they don't scream too much for us. Mwegumye, collectively comfort each other, communally give comfort so that you don't wail too much for us. Mutukabidde nnyo mwegumye, mutuleke, temutuwogganira, temutuleekaanira, mwe musoose ya Rabbi, twalabaalaba dda. Okay?
Right.
And I would add to that, did you talk about Twachisusa?
Yes.
Okay, and I think for me, Twachisusa is like, so even when one is paying a compliment, banaye mwebale kola, mwebale kola bulungi bwansi. Thank you for taking care of the community, or webale kuwayo sente mundange tusimidde ddala. People are like, Twachisusa,
Right.
And again, it is silencing expression of praise, silencing affirmation, silencing positive feedback,
There's also wefuge.
Yes, wefuge is control yourself. And so the level of self-censoring for me is amazing, because the government no longer says Mwefuge. It is us telling each other, wefuge nawe sirika, chirabo sirike. And I think it comes from this twako.
Right.
Initially it was we are tired of kukowa is about acting. And I told him OLEMWA comes from okowa wamarokowa ngobirema bikulema. But the withdrawal is not just about action now, it is also coming to voice, which is sirika busirisi, OLEMWA bikuyitirirako n'OLEMWA. And I think I want to relate all of this to two common sayings in Uganda popular culture today. One is tusaba government yetuyambe.
Right.
The idea that the only people we can call out to is when we are calling to the government. So if there's a problem, tetugenda kwekalakasa, tugenda kusirika, tulibako, but tusaba government yetuyambe. And so the idea that we can only speak as beggars, appealing to a benevolent government to help us, has become popular within common everyday Ugandans. And the other one, which brings all of this silencing and stopping to act into question, is a powerful quotation from Moyogwa Gangwa, Afande. You've talked about Afande Katumba Wamala. And Katumba Wamala has used his power to serve the oppressor, the dictator in power in Uganda. And so I would not refer to him as an exemplar, as a person whose words I want to repeat in terms of encouraging myself. But Moyogwa Gwanga, who was a Fande Mohammed. Yes, Chirumira.
Yeah.
Said about silence, I think one of the most powerful statements that encouraged me. So you said to me, Stella, where do you draw your encouragement from? And he said, Woyogera bakutta. Bwosirika bakutta. No recho yogera kubanga bajja kutta. In English, translated to say, if you speak, they will murder you. Those other people, they will murder you. If you silence yourself, they will murder you. So you may as well speak, because whether you speak or you silence yourself, they will murder you. And I think for me that the idea of nothing will stop a murderous, brutal dictator from murdering a person was exemplified, of course, by people such as Olanya that you talk about, but even everyday Ugandans.
Olanya Abiriga. So
Banji Nyonyo Mayombo Olanya Abiriga Serena Nebanda, like the line is long, but as saying that you don't have to be a person in power to be murdered by the regime. In November 2020, everyday Ugandans were doing their business, totally not protesting, not involved in any notorious speech. Women by the roadside, young men buying food, an elderly man going to a shop. These people were murdered by stray bullets.
Yeah.
Okay? They were not talking, they were not speaking, they were not doing anything. And so the idea that silence is protective in a dictatorship is fallacy. It's false.
Yeah.
It is a lie. The people in the Omusinga's palace in Kasese were sleeping.
Right.
In the dead of the night. And there were gunshots. The order was to shoot to kill. Okay, mass graves. And so this history of murdering Ugandans does not discriminate against those who silence themselves and those of us who speak. Of course, when we speak, one might think that we are exposing ourselves to danger. On the other hand, I can give testimony that speaking out pushes a person into the public limelight. And if anything happens, people will say, where is Nyanzi? Right?
Right.
And there's a protection that comes from refusing to silence oneself. In fact, after I began criticizing the regime, many people said to me, Stella, why don't you keep quiet? And I remember meeting elders in my family, including clan elders, who were really concerned. And a debate opened. Should she speak? Should she keep quiet? And one of the gray-haired men said, you know, muwala waffe bw'asirika bajja munyiga wabulewo ayogera, saying if our daughter silences herself and just disappears quietly, one day she will be, I don't know what kunyiga is. She'll be pressed today. Oba kunyiga kuno, I thought pressed double photo in second. She will be pressed out of existence. And because she's been quiet, nobody will even notice Nyanzi's mouth has stopped talking. And so the idea that silence is protective for me is contestable. But I'm willing to listen to what other panelists have to say in response to this.
Mr. Lyobia, what are your thoughts on this idea? You are a journalist. You are the Secretary General for Uganda, journalists in Uganda, right? As a writer, also does Lugambo. What are your thoughts?
First of all,
you are in as big trouble as some of us are when we point out these inconsistencies in government and how governments operate, how people relate with government, and specifically how elites are positioning themselves in these spaces, political spaces.
First of all, I wanted to, as Stella was bringing out some of the phrases that people use in this country. One time I've been reminded of one of the phrases as I was investigating the 267 billion loss at Uganda Airlines. One of my sources within the airline told me, just after we've shared this information, please erase. The other word was abasajja bakuba. And that was just after the Kakwenza debacle that rocked the nation and the world at large. So if you look at the challenges that do happen, the challenges of speaking within this country, you realize that even those within government and everywhere, those working within government and those out of government are all suffering the same. The only problem is that the suppression is continuing and it's growing each and every day without anyone thinking about how to leave the Pandora box that they are in. One time, one of the gentlemen at the Air Force is called Padeng Ankunda Nivel. A second lieutenant has just been promoted from a sergeant, and this guy was speaking against the injustices within the country. All of a sudden, he went disappearing, and all the people had to start looking up for him. Even up to now, no one knows where he is. If you look at another young gentleman at the Air Force, again, the Uganda People's Defense Air Force, he's called Leon Rangalumaga. One time when
you should protect their identities in case
no, these people have spoken out and they are still speaking out even up to now. This gentleman stood up against then Chief of Staff of the Air Force, James Virunja, and he was imprisoned at the officers' mess for more than 5 days, only because he spoke out. And if you look at even the society we work in, and even as journalists, you find a colleague who is a journalist and he cannot investigate something because he knows what Kakwenza has gone through is something very bad. What other people have gone through, what Stanley Ndaula has gone through is something very bad. What Moses Mugarura has gone through is extremely disgusting, only because someone has to go through prison, someone has to be tortured, only to divulge who has given him that information, only to answer why he's writing about things that are not supposed to be written about in this country. Now, because of such challenges, and if you look at even what Stella Nyanzi went through, spending more than a year in prison, and what Kakwenza went through, most of the people within this country don't think it is appropriate for them to speak out. And even when you're speaking to someone with authority, someone with power, even when he's mandated to speak on behalf of government, you realize that that very person will not speak only because someone superior than him will not allow him to speak because of the anomalies of the test that we live each and every day. And no one is ready to help out one another. But at the end of the day, we find ourselves in a situation where we are all living in paranoia. Mm. You are feeling bad inside you. You cannot speak only because you still think you want to earn a living, you want to earn a piece of bread, you want to earn something, and then all these elites keep quiet, sit down and keep quiet only because they think they are still earning from something that is already derailing this country.
Right. Right, right. It seems we are losing.
So,
Are
but
we losing you?
when people continue sitting, I'm sorry. Hello.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. So we have lost Mr. Rai. He'll come back shortly. In the meantime, nice to have you back, Miss Chilabo. Are you able to speak now?
Yes, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Oh, thank God.
What did you do?
I had to switch laptops.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
All right. So introduce yourself, and we have already delved into the conversation. You missed a couple of deliberations, but pretty sure you do have your own thoughts regarding this notion of people thinking that when they engage uh, in political affairs or in having conversations about accountability uh,
Mm.
regard to politicians in Uganda, they are likely going to face the wrath uh, of government. And they have this notion that, when I keep quiet and just make my money, akola sente osirike, eduka, tochisusa. There are so many slogans that we have lately. These slogans sometimes are meant to either depict some sort of hope. When you make money no sirika, ojja kuba bulungi. Or some of them are even depicting hopelessness, complete hopelessness. For example, Uganda OLEMWA.
Mm.
We are done. One of them, Peter, just wrote the same thing in the comments. Uganda OLEMWA. Uh, so, what are your thoughts on this? Why are all these slogans cropping up? Uh, and what do we need to do? Why are most elites quiet? And why do those ones who choose to speak up categorized as nuisances or a nuisance to society? And this, I refer to myself. I also refer to Dr. Stella. I also refer to Kakwenza, who some elites think that they are going too far.
Okay. Thank you for having me. Sorry about the network and the interruptions that I've been having, but I'm hoping from now on I'll be stable. So once again, my name is Marion Chirabo. I am the CEO of Next Gen Women Initiative that practically deals with encouraging women's participation at institutional levels. So we do movement building, especially around the students' movement, but we put feminist touch to it. So just to dive into the conversation, and I'm just giving my own thoughts because I don't know what the other speakers have talked about, so I don't know how to continue. So when we talk about apathy, political apathy, it usually takes place in a context whereby people are feel that their political participation in politics will not yield any result. That no matter what they do, it doesn't matter whether they vote, let me say, or maybe have these and these conversations around what is happening politically in their country, or no matter how much they participate in political discussions or political processes, they feel that there will be no relevance, their voices will not be heard, and they will not be able to get their message across. I will say that political apathy is not particularly a case of Uganda alone. Globally, we have seen especially when you're looking at statistics around elections, whether it's the UK, whether it's America, whether it's African countries, there is less and less interest that people, especially young people and marginalized groups and minorities, have little interest they have in participating in political processes. Averagely, the political participation across the world stands at around 50%, and it keeps on declining as the years go by. But however, in our context of Uganda, but also in other countries, it when research is carried out, it all goes basically to the same thing, and the same thing is that people are losing hope in their democracies, people are losing hope in their political leaders, people are losing hope in the ability of a democracy to deliver the kind of future that they want generally all over the world. But also in Uganda's context, research carried out shows that it also becomes dangerous to participate in these political processes. That is for Uganda and most African countries. We have seen what happened during the 2021 elections, and where families are still grieving their sons and daughters. We don't know where most of our friends are. We have friends who can no longer walk. They have scars all over their body, and it is because they dared to have a voice. They dared to go and cast a vote for the choice of candidate that they wanted to. So if we're talking about political apathy, these are some of the things we need to look at. Is it basically because people are not interested, or what is the cost of actually being interested? You know.
Right.
But then also on the other hand, when it comes to the elite, I would also say that we when it comes to, let me say, calling uh, kind of castigating those who dare to participate in
Process.
these political processes despite of the cost that it comes with. Most of the time, the elite fall into the propaganda of the state. I wouldn't say it's only propaganda of the state, but it's also propaganda that has been carried on from colonial times till now. The idea that the elite, the academicians, should be in their own small ivory tower and should not participate in or should have a kind of neutrality when it comes to the politics of their country. We also see this, whether it is, let me say, professionals, when we are looking at trade unions and professionals coming together to organize, we usually see the rhetoric of economic issues are different from political issues, and therefore they should never at one time cross paths. When you become political, then it becomes something else, and something that we don't want, something that is dirty, that we should not interfere with. It comes from, when an academician talks on political issues, then suddenly they become mad, and that is not where they're supposed to be. They're supposed to read their books, write their essays, and stay in their ivory tower. So, in a way, we have carried that. It is also a tool of divide and rule, in order to separate the intellectual, how can I say? So a movement comprises of both the physical and intellectual. You can't have movements, at least meaningful movements, without the intellectual part, or the intellectual anchoring of movements. So in a way, you come up with these, let me say, you know, um, you come up with these kinds of organizings that are non-political, and yet, in order for them to have results, they have to interact with the political space. I don't know if you get me.
Yes.
So you
Because they
you
are governed
you you have this movement. Beg
because
your
they're
pardon?
usually, because they're usually governed by the policies which policies are made by politicians.
Exactly. So you have a very, how can I call it, a very pseudo and very awkward kind of thing going on. So the people are trying to fight back, but they don't necessarily have the tools. They don't have the right tools to fight back. So that's why, most of people castigate our people power and loop for having those. You see, we have the physique and we're ready to go on. But when it comes to having the intellectual muscle, there's a way that, there's a divide between the intellectuals and those who are ready to go on the streets. And yet there needs to be a kind of alliance between the two for you to have a meaningful revolution. I mean, even if we look at the French Revolution, yes, the peasants had a very great role, but the people who sparked off the revolution were the philosophers and the ones who led it, the intellectual class. So there's no way you can do without it. So that kind of mismatch, even when we are looking at the violence taking, hindering people from participating, it's important for us to also look at how they divide between the academicians and the practitioners, the people who sit down and analyze and critically think. The critical thinking is not being put into action. So there's a great divide, and unless that divide is kind of reconciled, we will never have a meaningful revolution. Because even when you're talking about violence, I mean, in Kenya, we have had academicians who have been locked up for their political views. They still continued in it never stopped them from engaging politically. In the most violent of regimes like the apartheid, you saw the academicians in the struggle fighting alongside. So why is Uganda's own different? It might be different because of the orientation, that mental kind of orientation of thinking that they are separate and divided, and yet they're supposed to be one. Yeah.
Do you think that the notion that silence might protect them as elites, that if you choose Colascent or CDK, Amulave Duka, or whatever slogans that they use, that, you know what, if you just concentrate on your business and make a lot of money, you're going to be fine. But then we look at other examples with people who have worked within government, people who have been in the spaces of power, that have faced the same wrath from the very government that they serve. I gave an example of General Katumba Wamala, who survived an assassination in which his daughter was killed, was murdered. I also give an example of the late Right Honorable Dr. Jacob Olanya, who, according to his dad, was poisoned by the very some of the very elements within government that he serves. When we go back to, I think General Funza has talked about a lot of people being poisoned by the very government that they serve. And this is someone who was in the inner circle of the Bushmen, the Bushmen, you know what I mean when I say the Bushmen, or the liberators in quotes. Do you think that the notion of silence offers protection? Dr. Stella, you can speak, and then Marion will come back.
Right. So in response to what you've asked, I mean, where I ended the other time for me was that silence, in fact, does not protect. And my quotation came from Moyogwa Gwanga Fande Chilumira, who said, Woyogera bakutta, bw'osirika bakutta, n'olwekyo yogera kubanga bajja kutta. And true to the character of dictatorship, he was murdered as predicted. So for me, the idea of silence protecting anybody anybody, irrespective of what side, whether in the liberation struggle or working for the oppression of Ugandans, is false. There's no truth to it. And again, whether it's the murders by gunmen or the poisoning or the assassins riding motorbikes or the engineered bomb blasts, there is no safety or protection in Uganda. But even everyday people die from malaria because hospitals run out of malaria queen or whatever anti-malarials people are using. Women die giving birth. Children die because they got pregnant during COVID-19 and there's no contraception. Road accidents are killing people. And so in Uganda, the illusion of silence to protect anybody is an illusion. It's an illusion. And I think for me, every time I sit with people who say to me, but Stella, your mouth will put you into trouble. I didn't have to open my mouth to get into trouble, right? In dictatorships, anything that upsets the status quo will necessarily be a threat, be considered a threat that must be eliminated, that is a target to be taken out. And I think that anybody who has the privilege of education, right, is uniquely targeted. Kastobanti wasoma. Once you have the rare blessing of a university degree, first degree, of a diploma from college, of graduate education, of doctorate education, any qualification that gives you a resource that can be utilized, right? The dictatorship of necessity expects that those of us who are privileged because of our education, our skills, our expertise will serve the dictatorship, okay? And I think part of the problem is that a lot of elite, educated, skilled, qualified Ugandans have chosen to be subservient to the dictatorship. And so they use their professional experience and expertise and knowledge to service the dictatorship. And so the default sort of, the default position where privilege was serving the underprivileged class has been overridden by this new tyrannical authoritarian expectation that the mandate of educated people is to service dictatorship, to service oppression, to service the militant, corrupt regime. And because they are corrupt, anyone who wants to benefit, I think the point that Comrade Lubula mentioned is that some people think, I need to earn a piece of bread, so let me silence so that I can continue derailing the country. Now, the idea that the only way to have an income, to make some profit, is by either serving the regime or silencing oneself in order not to appear on the radar of trouble causers, has then disadvantaged many of us who have the privilege of education and academic qualifications, because once we choose not to play with that narrative of the nation, then we either become sellouts, yet the real sellouts are those who are using their privilege to service dictator Museveni. But in this upside down sort of world view, those of us who refuse to use our privilege to service dictatorship are then mislabeled as sellouts, as turncoats, as betrayers, because we have refused to service Museveni. And I think that is part of the problem, Henry, that the silence sometimes is imposed by peers who have yielded to this very controlling national narrative and performance that educated elite people have to lick the asses of the dictator in order to keep profiting. And that is terrible. because suddenly those of us who refuse to continue servicing dictatorial power, to continue licking the smelly feet of the dictatorship, are marginalized, thrown out, pushed out. And I think that then the culture of passivity in terms of the liberation struggle and political action that Marion mentioned becomes enshrined as part of our culture as Ugandans. That yes, elite people, educated people, people with some level of privilege and knowledge and income can meet in very bourgeois clubs to talk about our professions, to talk about economy, to talk about fuck this and fuck that and what not. But we refuse to then expand these clubs and associations and groupings and organizings towards the liberation struggle because it's dangerous. It's also not fashionable. Also, the general narrative in Uganda today is that privilege serves abusive privilege and it doesn't serve the underprivileged. So I've spoken a lot of this and that. I guess what I'm saying is that part of the psychosis means mental illness. Part of the psychosis of Uganda was described with the word paranoia, which Henry Lubulwa used. Paranoia means suddenly we are scared of everything and everyone. Okay? We are scared of speaking because they're snitches. I think it was Sejusa, David Tinyefuza, who talked about we carry chapatis in our courts because we are suspicious of the poison and poisoning. And then, I mean, look, I was, when I left Luzira prison, 2 months after I was, no, 1 month after I was released from Luzira prison, my kidneys began failing and I was found to have toxins. So ideas about poison are not fictitious. When Olanya says that, when Olanya's father says, my son said to me he was poisoned, it's not fictitious. We know that this regime has been poisoning people, especially people in power. Along line, all those religious clerics who just died suddenly of blood clots and stuff like that. We don't know where these clots are coming from. They could be the Chwezi clots. You know that Chwezi has poison. But away from joking and being a jester, I think that the paranoia of the nation, especially the elite class of the nation, comes from self-silencing. Because like I said, we have ideas. It doesn't matter if one is a border mechanic or one is a university professor or one is a surgeon or one is a journalist or lawyer or whatever, whether they live in Uganda or in diaspora, everybody in Uganda who has a bit of brain sees the rivers of blood that flow, sees the massive monies that are stolen, sees the rape of our constitution, sees the impotence and emasculation of our parliament. Everybody who has half a brain has a stake and something to say to power, abusive power in Uganda, but many choose to silence themselves. And that silencing and bottling in of resistance, of voiced dissidence, causes mental illness among Ugandans. So Uganda as a nation is sick because our elite classes have refused to take the leadership for the liberation struggle. I think I'll end with one note. Marion mentioned the leadership in opposition, political opposition groupings. I think that part of the pity is that while the opposition in Uganda is criticized for not being effective, those who would have the ideas to help sharpen the cutting edge of the opposition have decided to cut off their dicks and sit on them, right? Instead of coming to fertilize and inseminate the revolution. And so I think that a person who's not participating lost the moral authority to get involved. We can no longer afford to have a neutral, I think neutrality was also a word used by Mario, and we can no longer afford to have a neutral intelligentsia, because even in our anti-colonial struggles, students at Makerere, during the independence anti-colonial struggle in Uganda, students were at the forefront in the 1979 liberation struggle. Intelligentsia were at the forefront. Unfortunately, many were murdered by Idi Amin. Many fled from the country. there's a cost to pay, but I think the bigger cost to pay is that if all the academic and skilled Ugandans silence ourselves, then we shall have no country to talk about. We shall just have a prison, sadly. So I think for me that silence does not buy anyone any protection. Rather, we should encourage people with some education to use it to inseminate the liberation struggle.
Mr. Luwolo, your thoughts?
When David Sejusa wrote a missive about the Mhozu project some years back, about that was about 2013, 2012, the Daily Monitor had to look out for ways on whether they can publish or not publish. Unfortunately, the state got to realize that Daily Monitor had gotten the missive before they had to publish. Then managing editor of the Monitor, Daniel Kalinaki, had to sit with his team, which involved a number of senior reporters, including Resdel Kasasira and Richard Wanamba. They are the top-notch security reporters at the time in the Daily Monitor and in the country. They had to come up with a resolution, which was, if we sit on this, we are going to suffer with the state. If we publish, they are going to suffer again with the state, because they know we have the documents, they know we have the data, and they have to come and search each and every computer within the premises. At the end of the day, they had to publish the story, and still the state had to come the next day and close down the Daily Monitor. They are the things that do happen in this country each and every time. We get to a point where we think, should we speak or shouldn't we speak? At the end of the day, if you don't speak, you face the same challenges as the people who do speak. We tend to forget each and every time that we are working in a country, even when our laws, even when the Constitution, even when the international obligations like the Philadelphia Declaration and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which are all domesticated in the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda, do guarantee that we have the right to speak, even when it is being curtailed by the people who hold the power and hold the gun. We still have that right, because again, if you don't speak, you find yourself in a situation where you are going to face similar challenges as those who have spoken. Now, as all this happen, the biggest problem we find, even with the elite, is that they even don't know what is in the Bill of Rights. They even don't know what are these inalienable rights that we don't have to ask government or even one person to offer to us. These are God-given rights. Now, the biggest task we have today as a country is even to educate the elite that it is your right to speak, especially when you're speaking about things that do affect this country, things that do affect, because this country is made up of people. And if anything affects you, it affects the country. We need to get back to the drawing board and try to understand, what are we going to do to ensure that all these people try to understand that it is not a privilege for us to speak against anything that do happens within this country. Because you find someone at the Civil Aviation Authority and he doesn't want to speak. To speak to you, wants to take you to the toilet and tells you something that is taking place there. If you have to speak about a district chairperson who is doing something wrong, a military officer who's doing something wrong against what he's supposed to do, people fear to even just go and tell someone that this has happened to me. When Sauda Madada was trying to fight a gentleman called Alex around the People Power offices earlier this week, you realize that the people at the political entity of National Unity Platform, the people close to Alex, the people close to Sauda, were not all. They all did not want to speak about the debacle that did happen there. When Sauda Madada blocked a road, even had to come out and slap someone only because someone had to use the same road which is close to the NUP offices, and they expect this very person to keep quiet because he still has to get to that place, he will still be beaten if he finds himself in a situation where he finds Madada again. And it takes that kind of courage for someone to come and speak out against these challenges. We all know there is no country in the world that has gotten good governance without people speaking, without the elites involving themselves in the processes of having good governance within the country. Even when the border people speak, them alone cannot cause change. Change can only be caused by when the elites who have the minds, who have understood, who know where to benchmark from, come and involve themselves in the affairs of running a country, especially we are looking at the God-given rights, the inherent rights that they do have. So we need to get back. And actually, it's the same reason as to why government is fighting so hard to have civil society being curtailed again, because right now, even the civil society organizations within the country are being blocked from doing the work they're supposed to do. If you look at what DGF is going through, if you look at what NGF is going through, if you look at about what HearingNet went through and even now it's closed, if you look at what SEDU is going through, if you look at what even other media organizations within the country have to go through because of speaking, you find yourselves that even those people who have to speak on behalf of the elites and the young people and ordinary people cannot speak. So if you don't come out and try to tell these people that, it is your right, this is what you're supposed to do, because you're not going to be in captivity all the time, we shall not find a solution. But then it remains incumbent upon us to realize that Chapter 4, the Bill of Rights, are what we need to look at all the time.
This is the state of the nation. Irifa Mwanga. We are deliberate, we are reasonable, we are uncensored. The state of the nation with Henry Salu. All right. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter and all other social media platforms where we engage. It's a pleasure to have all of you join us in this conversation. Those who have questions, please place them in the comment section so that we can continue engaging with them. So now that we seem to have known what the problem is, we know that keeping quiet is not going to help anyone. It doesn't help the politicians. It doesn't help the elites. It doesn't help the common people. It doesn't help us, really. What do we need to do to encourage elites specifically? Because if the voices of the elites is as important to the liberation of our country as anything else, how are we supposed to encourage elites to speak up without necessarily thinking that in order to speak up, I must work for the establishment? Because we see the new establishment in the legislature, both the speaker and the deputy speaker are former opposition leaders from FDC. They used to speak up against government. Now they work for the government and they are leading the legislature. Must we join the dictatorship in order to keep it accountable? Dr. Stella.
Must we join the dictatorship? Henry Nkuvume. So I suppose for me that I am totally opposed to the idea of rape. Will I rape myself? Will I join my rapist to rape myself? It can't happen.
Right.
It can't happen. But I want to say that yours is a wrong premise. You're assuming that members of the opposition who desert and join what I have likened to a rapist and then begin raping themselves don't do it in order to speak. They do it in order to eat. So the mouth can be used for eating, the mouth can be used for speaking, the mouth can be used for many things. I think that the need, I mean, Lubula's words were they silence themselves to earn a piece of bread and continue derailing the country. I think for me that everybody I know, right from a mentor I loved and admired, Owechitiwa Joyce Sebugwawo, whose defection from FDC's leadership. She wasn't just a common person in FDC like myself. She wasn't a junior in FDC. She's been there for as long as the history of FDC, you know, even pre-FDC reform agenda. When a person such as herself deserts, it's not to speak, because Sebugwawo was speaking. Sebugwawo roared like a lion. We learned to roar from her. And so they don't leave because they want to speak. They leave because they want to eat. In the case of Joyce Sebugwawo, losing the election to a member of NUP meant that she was losing one of the potential sources of her income. So when Museveni, full of wit, reaches out to her, she yields and joins his cabinet. Now, Joyce Sebugwawo has never been silent. She wasn't looking to speak out for anything about anything when she went to NRM. Joyce Sebugwawo was ensuring that her stomach kept on feeding. And she could no longer feed because the NUP had taken her position of power, which was opening her purse, that was giving her status, social status and power. And so when she defects to NRM, Joyce Sebugwawo is carefully calculating to ensure that she maintains her income from public funds, through public funds, if not maintains them, expands them. And the very same can be said of Tayebwa, who is now, I mean, what I'm saying is confirmed by Tayebwa. He left FDC, joined NRM. He's now deputy speaker after being chief whip. The same can be said of Among, who is the speaker, left FDC not to speak. Even in FDC, she was holding a pocket. So for her, it was really about how does one enhance their chances of staying within the political class. If FDC was not serving her, and NRM could, and look, it opened doors for her. She's now bleached skin and all at the forefront of parliament. And so I don't think that those who desert because they necessarily want to speak out on any issue. The deserters that I know, the ones I looked up to, and Joyce Sebugwawo for me is a case in point. When she was speaking in FDC, she was fierce. She was very critical of the regime, but also of the politics inside FDC. Right? In fact, joining the NRM silenced her. So it wasn't about going to the enemy to speak. It was about continuing to eat. And so your question about must one therefore join their rapist in raping the nation in order to keep speaking starts from a wrong premise. I think what I said before was important, that those of us with a level of education have got a platform to speak. It doesn't matter where we are, oba Kurumbe, oba Mukatale, oba ku LC, oba mu disco. Once we have a certain attainment of education, not too much. S4, S6, if you have a diploma or a degree, you're amazing. You have so much power. If you have a PhD like myself, oh God, you're bubbling mad with all this power. And so we don't need to be in a specific location in order to speak. Our education opened our mouths for us already. Our education opened our brains. And with open brains, when you see this, you want to speak, you want to change, you want to act. That is the power of privilege. I think that those who desert the political opposition in Uganda do so because of eating. And maybe just one last point. I think that the oppressor is tactical and strategic, much more than we are, much more organized. He knows who to pick and who to target and what circumstances we are all facing and what sort of bait to bring in front so that our giants in the opposition can bite and run. So the hook of the enemy is very well calculated and orchestrated. Museveni won't reach out to powerless Ugandans. Those ones are for this orange-shirted man. Bala.
Yeah.
And he choose. Okay? But Museveni has a class of intelligentsia who are looking for which people in the opposition are thinkers and speakers and actors who can be hooked and what hooks to use. Unfortunately, as the opposition in Uganda, we don't take care of our leaders as well as we should. And so in moments when they are down, there's no fallback, there's no safety net, and so it's very easy to blame them for crossing over. We haven't thought through what strategies or counter strategies we have put in place to ensure that our top dogs, when they are wounded by the processes of democratization, are not easy to lure away from the struggle and to take to the other side. And so I think before we blame people about crossing over to the enemy, we should also think through why they do it and what alternatives we've given them, especially when the wounding comes from within the opposition. When NUP takes an FDC's potential source of income, what's the expectation? That the FDC person won't run to NRM? How realistic is that in poor Uganda? And so I think, again, I don't know who it was who talked about educating the elite. I think it was Henry. It is important that we realize that the politics of the day in Uganda necessitates that even the leadership at the forefront of opposition political politics is taken care of. We must take care of them. I think for me that part of the problem, for example, when we hear Bobi Wine yalia, Besigye yalia, oba baalya gwe wakola ki okulaba nti bakufu, Bobi osanga muyala, osanga Besigye muyala, tukoze ekyokulaba nti bakamanda baffe tebalya. Twesiriwaza gundi yalya, Nyanzi yalya, yalya, bwe mba nalya wakola ki nga ndi muyala, mumanyi nvudde mu kkobera, wakola ki okulaba nti sirya. Okay? And just to say, I'm not saying Bobi yalia or Besigye yalia or Nyanzi nalia. I'm just saying that we are very quick to criticize and condemn our leaders when they fall, having been in circumstances where it's very easy to cross over to the NRM and gain weight, gain money, gain class, gain an embassy. I've been over at embassies so that I can shut up. Having been in that position of temptation, what I can say in response to members of the opposition crossing over, that it's very tempting, particularly because those of us in the opposition vanguard have not thought about alternative ways to ensure that the leaders and active members of political opposition parties do not run away. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Welcome back, Marion. Are you able to speak? So the question has evolved, but you can start from where you left off earlier on. But the question now, which Dr. Stella says it's wrongly premised, for me was whether it is advisable for elites who are not comfortable speaking up, joining the dictatorship in order to speak up. and I gave a reference to the speakers, to the new establishment in parliament. Both speakers were from FDC. Are they speaking up now? Are they going to do the right thing? What is going to be their mode of governance? We have lost her again. What is going to be their mode of governance? Are they actually going to bring the ideas that they had from FDC into the legislature now that they are in charge? Are they going to be fair in scrutinizing which bills are discussed in parliament? And are they going to offer the country what the country has always looked up for in a functional legislature? Henry, you can answer that question as Marion comes back.
You know, we tend to think that
just
we're a
about,
nation.
is Marion, are you able to speak now? Unmute yourself. You're muted. Unmute. Are you able to unmute? Right. Okay, Henry, proceed.
I was saying we have come to always be called a nation of whiners. When you look at all the people that have been in this country, look at even President Museveni himself was from a different political party, just like the former speaker Jacob Olanya, the late, and if you look at the current speakers of parliament, the UPC guys, the natural changes, and the rest, who have been getting into the government to what you said would be rectifying what should be done. What exactly should be done? They don't do, and they instead look at keeping quiet and not doing exactly what should be done. At one time, I remember one time when natural change was praised, just like Betty Kamya were praising the president, even in disregard of the challenges and the rights violations and whatever this country was going through, and no one was speaking about that. So I don't think getting into a government can help us realize what we need. I don't think it should just be the opposition that should instill forcefulness into this government. I don't think it should be. It should be collective responsibility of all leaders, of all the elites, of each and every person to ensure that this country gets the best it must. It should be having, because today we all suffer the same things. We all find ourselves in a situation where we can't get to the airport on time. We all suffer having very bad transport network to the islands, also the islands and to the different places within this country. So it is incumbent upon us to all speak out. We should all speak out. The thing is, even when you have eaten or not, what should we have as a country? What should we be serving? What are the aspirations that we should be having as a country? Our neighbors are building flyovers everywhere, and only having one flyover just being constructed again. Our neighbors are having the best airline, the best airline moving around the world. Our neighbors are having all the best things, the best practices we should be having. We should be getting out from our neighbors, and you're not copying any of those only because the people we are the kind of community we live in, the kind of society we are working in is a society where everyone is presumed to be a whiner. We need to get back to the drawing board and also understand that, is this a moral problem? Is it deeply rooted into the society? And is it individual carelessness, or is it about what we need to do as a country to ensure that we get to a point where we get back to track? Banage, governance, speaking up in this country is something that we need to talk about all the time. And by the way, when you speak up, when you speak, the leaders, the people in power listen. if you look at what Andrew Mwenda was doing before he went to the Independent, the president would listen and even call him to State House and then try to look out for a solution. But today, after he stopped speaking of what really needs to be talked about in this country, what does he do to ensure that he does impactful work for the country or even creates change, looks out for good governance and a better country that you all need? Let's focus on having, yeah, let's re-engage. Let's still fight to have a debate on free speech. Let's fight to have a debate on how to talk about a better country and how it is governed in a better way, not just having a few people thinking that bagenda baliyo bafune mucho na kiri bamanye nti ensi yaabwe etambudde bulungi.
You cited Andrew Mwenda's impact before he joined the NRM, and it
Yes.
seems like his impact has now diminished ever since he joined government, which is what Dr. Stella was talking about. The Honorable Sebugwao, she seems to have been silenced by joining the government. So now that we do have this establishment in the legislature who are both old students of the FDC, where they exalted accountability, where they exalted democracy and freedom of speech, we wonder if the parliament now has changed into, should we be hopeful that the legislature is going to be more vibrant? How should we think about the new legislature? Marion, welcome back. I hope you are now in a better position to speak. Unmute yourself. And yeah, we have already missed your brain. So hopefully you are able to speak now. Unmute yourself. You're unmuted when you came in, but I don't know when you became muted. Marion, do you hear me? Marion, unmute yourself. Dr. Stella, do we envision a better legislature with the two in charge, the two former FDCs in charge? Can we be hopeful that there's going to be vibrancy within the legislature?
Right. So to that question, I have a two-pronged answer. One is to say that Jacob Oulanyah was a member of the UPC before he defected to NRM. During from the time of his death, his passing, a number of Ugandans have written about how good and eloquent and efficient and how hardworking he was. And people have talked about his great ability to stick with causes and see them to the end, especially speaking about how he resisted against the introduction of privatization, I think, or was it the removal of boom from students at Makerere University, and the extent to which he committed and he could go for a particular cause was celebrated by many people, eulogizing him. I think that part of my problem, which was mentioned last week, is that in spite of being such an amazing good leader with so many skills and abilities, Jacob Oulanyah used his leadership in the service of dictatorship. And so, in spite of his foundations and beginning in the opposition, in older opposition in the UPC, having converted his service to the oppressor, it didn't matter what his abilities and potential were. He was not working in the service of freedom and liberation in Uganda. Instead, he was serving the dictator. So that is one way of responding to you, that because one is sitting in NRM clothes. One is a member of the NRM, and for me, NRM necessarily means that one associates with the ideology that enables and entrenches dictator Yoweri Museveni in power. Having positioned oneself that way, one therefore becomes part of the enablers of oppression. And so it doesn't matter what sort of legislations there will be passed, they will be in the service of dictatorship. For example, for example, removal of the term limits, for example, the introduction of the Public Order Management Act, the introduction of the Computer Misuse Act, all very repressive laws. And so for me as a person, again, in the liberation struggle, I have no mercy, I have no kind words, I see nothing good in anybody who chooses to work in the service of NRM. Having said that, I believe that Tayebwa and Among were tutored and mentored by Dr. Chizabesige in the early days of Forum for Democratic Change when it was Reform Agenda. I have heard that Tayebwa was an amazing leader at Makerere University. Similarly, I have heard that Anita Among was an amazing treasurer at the FDC. Having gone through the rigorous training and mentorship of Dr. Chizabesige, I know that in them is deposited good seed. However, and so the rigors of performance and hard work and questioning were given to them in their early days of being opposition members. My problem is I have not seen any evidence of politicians in the leadership who crossed over to dictatorial power using their new positions away from the dictatorship. Often the example of Betty Kamia, the example of Andrew Mwenda, the example of very many others highlights how even the foundation of values received from great mentors such as Chizabesige or Milton Obote, if there was any good in him, how those good qualities of leadership do not necessarily work in the service of the masses, but rather work in the service of the oppressor. Therefore, I'm not one of those who are too hopeful with the leadership of Among and Tayebwa as NRM members. I am not hopeful at all. It's a sad loss to Uganda and Ugandans that the vast majority of our parliament comprises members of the NRM. That parliament is dead to us. It doesn't serve us. It services dictatorial power, and the percentages, the dismal percentages of the opposition in parliament are not an accident. I think it's well engineered by Museveni.
Marion, what are your thoughts?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's Uganda network. Jesus. We should sue. Oh God. So like doctor, I honestly I don't think, I think we are yet to see a worse parliament in the history of Uganda, to me. Worse or worst. I think we can even see by the first few months of Anita being deputy speaker. What I see, there's a really huge difference, and even if we're saying that that still under Rebecca Kadaga and Olanya, the parliament was used to kind of rubber stamp bills that were, how can I say, dangerous bills that muzzled and silenced any form of protest or any form of freedom of speech. But my consolation was always that at least we have a vibrant opposition in there, that at least there was some form of resistance, you know. People always say that, you know, the reason why people voted Noop was the allure of chaos, you know. The fact that, you know, if we cannot argue with words, if words are not going to make sense, maybe we start taking to the blows, and but at least by any means possible we must resist, you know. And whether it means spinning on a table in parliament, you know, and punching your neighbor and then on the next, yeah, of course it's not the intellectual way of doing things. I'm not sure, it's not that I'm advocating for violence, but it's a form of resistance. And for me, as long as that flame is still there, that form of resistance is still there is still hope for me. The challenge I find with Anita Monge's parliament is there is no fire, there is no spark. Even the one Zake who tried to bring a little spark there, you can see he's thrown out, and there is no one to defend him. There's complete silence. The worst that the opposition members did was to have a kind of a sit down. I don't even understand what it was, outside of parliament, and they did it for about 1 day. Was it 1 day or 2 days? And that was it, you know. Up to now, Sejirinya and his
Oh, yeah.
counterpart,
So,
Sewanya, are still in prison, but it's like we don't even care. The fire, the fire is gone, you know. It doesn't even have space to 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 how can I, there's no oxygen to even keep it going, you know. The problem I find with Anita Monge's parliament is that it completely suffocates anything. It's either through money or trips abroad, and if you do not succumb to any of those two, then they muzzle you, they throw you, kick you out. One way might say that maybe it's also the cohort of the opposition leaders, but yeah, it might be that, but also the environment, you know. Like, one thing about Rebecca is that she allowed there to be dissent. Sometimes she might even agree with you, you know, and stay away from the whole process. You know, other times she might agree and remove whatever item you don't want on the order paper, and remove it from there just so that she can keep the peace. There was that kind of balance, and somehow the opposition knew that it had a sort of protection in her, you know. But with Amongi, it's you're either with us or you're against us, and we will crush each and every person who stands in our way. And that is the tragedy of this parliament that I see, you know, that even in Tahewa I don't see a person who can stand up and defend any of those members of parliament. If we thought that, and to put it metaphorically, if we thought that that parliament was a rubber stamp, I think this time it's going to be what they call a pit latrine. The president will come in and out and use it however he wants, because there is no check, there is no balance, there's no one to tell him he cannot, you know. So so maybe that's the most frightening thing. I i don't i, I don't see any seeds of FDC in any of the two of them. I think once they crossed over, whenever someone crosses over to NRM, there's a way that they become a newborn baby. It's like they deny completely their past and they become something else that is unrecognizable, you know. So I think their morals, whatever they learned, whatever they're mentored in, they just sold it for a few pennies, and their souls are already sold to the devil. There is no redemption for them. I think
hmm, hmm, hmm,
for
hmm.
them
Oh, this is very disheartening, hearing this, and which is potentially the reality of what is going to happen. But I wonder if this is the right time for
yeah.
elites to start coming up
So
and
for me,
speaking. Sorry, please proceed.
beg your pardon.
Oh, so I guess my question now is this the right time for elites to come up and speak out louder than they have been, knowing very well that they have a double rubber stamp parliament that is not going to question nothing. Uh, even you have referenced Honorable Zake, who was supposed to, who is who has been one of the toughest or the radical MP that has been thrown out of his position right now. Uh, Recently had an embrace that didn't come off well with the public. So now the public seems to have lost some kind of trust in him. So if our parliament is at this level, whose responsibility is it to keep people accountable, leaders accountable? Is this our time to speak up, to speak up louder than we have been speaking? And how do we recruit more elites to join this small movement of speakers?
My God.
Marion, uh, do you hear us? Did you understand the
Hello?
question? Yeah, yeah. Unmute yourself. You keep muting yourself. The internet is not the best. I remember having this. I used to have this challenge with Dr. Stella until she migrated to Europe.
Hello? I'm back. Sorry.
Okay.
Ah, you guys, Uganda's network is so terrible. Yeah, so should I answer your question?
Please.
Well, I think for the next 5 years, we we certainly need an alternative because I see no hope in this parliament. I think it's even when the conversation about the parliamentary system of election comes up, I see no force that is going to challenge it. At least even putting up half the fight that the opposition MPs put up for Toji Kwatako. There is also a lot of division within the opposition parties themselves. And their division is unlike in the past where they would come together and agree on something that, this one is legitimately wrong. Let us make sure that we fight it. Even that kind of collaboration is not there with them anymore. I don't know if it was the effect of the 2021 elections, or perhaps they disagreed fundamentally, and maybe that's why we're seeing a lot of crossovers to the ruling party. Maybe the divisions kind of how can I say, created a kind of disillusionment that people don't care anymore what come may. I think some of them have given up, though they are not yet ready to admit it. So I think as citizens, we might have to look at alternative ways of organizing outside of our political leaders, unfortunately, because I feel in many ways either they have resigned themselves to the system, and perhaps you wouldn't blame them that much, but also maybe this is the wake up call that we need, because sometimes as a citizen we kind of leave the struggle up to political heads. And it's not like I have a real answer. I'm just thinking
Yeah.
that most of the time we let these struggles be personalized by individuals. So what happens maybe when those individuals are not in play? Who is there then to become our knights and shining armors? Maybe it can provoke the people to be like, okay, Besigye is not coming to my rescue. Bobby Wine is not coming to my rescue. Let's make this a wake up call to show that we all need to be part of this struggle, and not necessarily personalize it and make it as if the struggle is just for a few and not for myself. I'm not sure if it will be able, what is coming will be able to shock us into that. I'm hoping it does, but knowing Ugandans, that something happens, they complain a little, and then okay, we have learned to normalize the pain, the hurt. We have learned to live with it, to cope with it, and survive. Not really.
Moreover,
We have given up on thriving. We have given up on living. So we live each day as it comes, survive. I'm wondering when that moment in history will come whereby we're like, enough is enough. It's time for me to fight for the country that I want. It's time for me to actually live and thrive. I deserve to thrive. I deserve to live. I'm deserving of a country that belongs to me, that cares about me, a government that cares about me, that my taxes that I pay through my nose should mean something. Someone should be held accountable for all these murders and atrocities. My children should not die at the hands of greedy dictators that just want to plunger my country into ruin. I don't know. I'm not sure, but alternative ways. We need to think of alternative ways. We need to think outside of the box because we are on our own. I must tell you, in the next 5 years, we are on our own.
Dr. Stella, are we on our own? Because it seems people in Sri Lanka have reached that stage that Marion is talking about of this is not happening anymore. And they are actually looking, they are protesting in such a way that they want to get rid of the very president that they elected themselves. The president that was elected by popular vote is now facing the wrath of the people, trying to get rid of him. Are we on our own? And how do we implement these sentiments of we are on our own, we must do whatever it takes?
You're sighing, Henry.
I know I'm saying, because I'm like, why can't we act and actually make the government accountable? If this parliament is a double rubber stamp, when you compare it to the second Kadaga Olanya parliaments, if this one is a double rubber stamp, how do we respond to that?
Right. So three different sort of planes to answer you. One is around, are we on our own? The other one is about parliament. And I think, so I'll start with those two. I think for me that this overwhelming sense of despair hit me in January of 2021 when Yoweri Museveni declared himself as president. And in my mind, while I was grieving about the loss of my campaign, which wasn't really, the most important pain I endured, I think in my mind, the idea that I was going to do 5 more years under Yoweri Museveni was totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. And the danger of being a critical member of the opposition at that time included abductions. When my lover was abducted and taken away, I knew that it had become really dangerous to stay thinking about revolution and liberation in Uganda, and I fled. So fleeing was a refusal for me to say, I'm going to say we are on our own. It was a refusal for me to say we've lost all hope. It was a refusal for me to succumb to the leadership of dictator Yoweri Museveni for 5 more years. And I remember writing on on the wall. I have a lot of paper on the walls, stuck on the walls in my bedroom and the sitting room and the corridors in my house that we had in Uganda. I remember writing on the wall, not another 5 years, and writing poetry around not another 5 years, because for me, the very thought of 5 more years of Museveni made me sick. So that's the first thing, that the hopelessness that comes from a fragmented opposition means that we cannot even begin to stand up and offer resistance that's meaningful. And so the point about a fragmented opposition in the House of Parliament is replicated even in society. And I think that all attempts at alliances and coming together of the opposition, the activated political opposition in Uganda, have so far yielded nothing, zero. Okay. And I think that part of the problem is the frustration of realizing that the dictatorship has managed to engineer these divisions. And I think the greatest performance of division, the greatest display of division in the opposition comes alive every 5 years when we have to stand in our political parties and contest against each other. So Bobby Wine stands against, Amoriat stands against, the whole display of those who are running for the presidency against Yoweri Museveni, and some of them came with political parties. And I think that's one plane that already in a divided House of Parliament, we already have very small numbers to begin with, but even among the small numbers, we're divided. So in terms of our effectiveness to combine forces and lobby and take numbers away from the majority regime in power in parliament is rendered almost impossible. That's the first thing. And so I think it's not just about Zake. Zake on his own, even if he had not been demobilized by the Hague and whatever else came with it, is not enough. We need at least 250 more Zakes. And sadly, because we don't, Parliament is a game of votes. The A's say, the nays say, and as long as we don't have enough voting on our side for the masses, then we lost Parliament. The sad thing then for me, so the second point is around who checks executive power. According to the Constitution, the judiciary, the legislature, and maybe media are in place to check executive power. And I think that the point Marion made about the impotence, tebaima, tayewa taima, among taima, obusolo bufu, okay? Tewali tebasobola kukola kuyimiriza Sabanywi Musai, okay? And without necessarily being vulgar for the sake of vulgarity, what I'm saying is, in terms of standing up to oppressive executive power, if the SFC wanted to override parliamentary decorum and come to beat people with Olanya and Kadaga, perhaps there would have been a discussion, because it was about recognizing old power in the seat of the speakership. With Tayewa and Among, can any of them open their mouths to say, mouths is a wrong pronunciation. No. Can any of them open their mouths to say, Mzee Olimba? They will say, Mzee Tuangele Basa, right? And so I think for me that the general composure of the wielders of power in parliament necessarily mean that we can no longer look at that House of Parliament to check executive power. The judiciary is lost. Parliament is lost to us. And so I think that therefore the remnant of the resistance in Uganda must work even much harder to revive the revolution and liberation struggle, because sadly there's no alternative. And so, Henry, for me, having sunk in despair for a little while, I think that now that the election season is over, now that the formal structures of oppressive power have been put into place, it is high time that we reactivated revolutionary cells in Uganda. And I think that therefore the role of the academy, the role of the elite, the role of us with brains and mouths and ideas to talk about resistance and organize resistance and mobilize forms of resistance becomes more critical. It is not a time to sit down and lose hope. It is a time to refuel and recharge and find new ways of organizing. I don't think that waiting for 2026 is necessarily the alternative. I think that we can't wait to organize for the next farcical elections, the next sham elections. We have to find ways to start reactivating Ugandans in the opposition. Yesterday, so the role of academy, elite people, people with power, whether we're in diaspora or back home in Uganda, must start yesterday.
Do we still have a democracy in Uganda?
Are you asking me?
Structure-wise. As you wrap up, and then Marion will come in as well.
Is democracy a structure? I think that democracy is about the experiences of people. If I cannot speak, if as the panelists have ably demonstrated, that those of us with brains that think and mouths that speak and criticize and critique cannot speak because of fear, is that democracy? Where speaking out results into abductions and murder and prison time and exile and punishment from a repressive state, where we have laws in our law books that penalize free speech, is that democracy? When the violation of human rights continues unabated on a daily basis, coming from the executive orders from above all the way down to the military and the police and paramilitary institutions, and a corrupt, ineffective judiciary, an impotent parliament, is that democracy? To have hollow structures that don't serve the purposes for which they were created, is that democracy? And I think for me that democracy therefore becomes much more than the academic concept of having an executive, a judiciary, and 5 years of electing a parliament. That rhetorical performance has been effectively corrupted to service dictatorship. And so I think that the structures, notwithstanding, the replica of structures of democracy notwithstanding, we are living in dictatorship in Uganda. It is not democracy. The oppressive raping instrument of executive power has raped its way through our judiciary, our parliament, and all the other organs of democracy. And so, no, we may have a replica of the structures of democratic society, but in terms of function and role and freedoms and rights, we don't have any democracy in Uganda. We live in pure dictatorship, in my view.
Marion, your thoughts? Unmute yourself. There you go. Hello, you keep muting yourself.
Hello?
Yes.
I actually with Doka. We do not have democracy, you see, because all that restructure to keep a democracy, judiciary, the legislature, and even if those structures are dead, there's no one to protect the executive. We we have a population that is apathetic. We have an opposition that is divided, doesn't agree on anything. Unless you think that they will agree on equality, the protection of people's rights, and at least let us make sure that we can have those who are still living and maybe have been looked up unjustly, and the police try to make sure that we hold this.
Your voice is not. Your audio is
But
not.
as you can see, it's not going.
Your audio is not very good.
It's working.
It's not. You're not
What about
audible.
now?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, let me try something else.
Okay.
Hello?
That's much better. Much better.
Let me first remove this one. Okay. So as I was saying, that we cannot have a democracy if the two arms of government that are supposed to check the executive are literally captured and dead, I would say. I mean, recently you had what and it becomes so problematic when you find the head of the judiciary starts to play into the tribal sentiments that you have had come out of um, the president's mouth. It becomes problematic when you start to see that even in parliament where there's supposed to be exchange of ideas, it's a space where criticism should be protected and allowed in order for there to be healthy debate, that is also muzzled. So if you don't have the two arms of government to check the judiciary, the executive, then you can't have a democracy. If you have a people who cannot and hope
Yeah, we are losing you again. We are.
whereby also the opposition, your opposition leaders are not able to even agree on a common agenda, because if we are saying the problem is Museveni, the problem is the dictatorship, you would expect that when it comes to issues that concern coming together, and let us make sure that we protect people who have become political prisoners. Let us make sure that when it comes to the freedom of speech and expression, we stand with Zake. We do everything possible to make sure that at least, even if he eventually gets censored, yes, we might be outnumbered, but without a fight. He's not outnumbered without that solidarity, and the Kakwenza, we all come together and say that this is wrong. You should not do this to Kakwenza, and there are days, I'm nostalgic for the days, FDC, DP would come together, and an issue was an issue. There was no but you guys are tribal, but you guys are like this, you guys abuse us, you guys don't respect us. Like, I feel like most of the time we are on petty issues. I mean, why is it that I see an opposition leader castigating people in Seattle
Those are all important issues.
protesting against the poor service hospitals? I mean, first of all, you can't be seen to be conditioned to protest against the poor conditions in their hospitals. So it's a big mess. Yeah, we are slowly losing. Well, let me say, we're fast. For the next 5 years, it has become. It used to be slow, but
First, losing the essence of
I feel
parliament.
democracy.
Right. All right. Well, we have had it. Stella, you want to wrap up this conversation with thoughts on how to proceed? How do we get?
Even I think together with the loss of our democracy, got our sense of.
Thank you so much, Marion, for those submissions. Once again, Stella, let us wrap up this conversation.
Right. I suppose coming from what both Henry and Marion and myself have said, it seems to me that this is the wrong time for Ugandan elite to be apathetic. I think that we have the baton of the moment that those of us who realize the need for liberation and dream about revolution cannot merely stop at the need and the dream. In order to cross over into a Uganda that works for all of us, we have some work to do, and we cannot afford to delegate this work to others because we sadly have the privilege of education and relative power to act and mobilize and organize. And so, in terms of wrapping up, how does one wrap up a conversation that is an opener to a bigger revolutionary platform? I think one doesn't conclude. And so I don't want to conclude. However, I want to say that if there are any thinkers, scholars, writers, professionals, elite members of Uganda who realize the need to participate in liberating Uganda from oppressive power, that we must wake up and come together, whether we're in political parties or not, that we must find new ways of organizing to take power back and to the people, away from a small minority playing with military executive power. Our parliament sadly will not offer the leadership, neither will the vast majority of judicial officers. What must happen is, therefore, we need new forms of organizing away from the democratic structures, and perhaps new forms of organizing either with or without our former political parties. I think that's what's going to happen, is that new forms of thinking about how to organize liberatory power, revolutionary power, need to be injected, and our role as the elite cannot be underscored enough. If history is calling, if history has called, history makes a demand of us to participate actively in whatever ways we can. And for me, I'm a believer that Yoweri Museveni is on his way out, but he needs a push, and I want to be among the hands that are pushing him, the thinkers that are thinking about his way out, his exit, because to be honest, enough is enough.
Enough is enough. We have had it, and we need to recruit more elites. I guess we need to recruit more elites. If you're an elite out there who has been listening to this conversation, you are called upon to start speaking up and I guess refrain from using the OLEMWA slogan, because that's just an excuse that we need to stop reciting every time we are called upon to show accountability on things and to engage in active participation of politics to ensure that we have a better Uganda. My name is Henry Sally. This is the State of the Nation. It's been a pleasure having you all. This is the State of the Nation.